Good evening. Welcome to another episode of Talk Gnosis. Tonight we're going to continue our discussion on the Gospel of Thomas, this time with Logion number 23. Good evening, Bishop Peterson. How are you this evening?
I am wonderful, Bishop Canterbury. Shall I read this marvelous Logion?
Yes.
All right.
By all means.
Jesus said, I shall choose you, 1 out of 1,000 and 2 out of 10,000, and they shall stand as a single one.
Interesting. Now, I know we've got a few other versions of this.
Yeah.
We've got the late translation, which says, Jesus said, I shall choose you, 1 out of 1,000, 2 out of 10,000, and they shall stand at rest by being one and the same, which I find that interesting as well.
Yes, we've often talked about that stand at rest or stand language that we see in the Gospel of Thomas.
Mm-hmm.
And then Dores, we have Jesus said, I will choose you, 1 from 1,000 and 2 from 10,000, and those will be lifted up being one. Mm-hmm. So what we have here is Jesus talking about choosing a relatively small percentage of people from larger groups. And they're going to be, in two cases, they will stand as a single one, they'll be lifted up being one, or they're going to stand at rest by being one and the same. There's a sense of being drawn out and then being drawn back in to something, to being one, to maybe that source. Now, one of the curious things about this text is that it is not simply in the Gospel of Thomas. The Pistis Sophia has this saying, and Basilides also shared this saying as well. In addition, there is some parallel to Matthew 22:14 when he talks about, for many are called, but few are chosen. There's this notion of choosing. Now, one of the, in addition to this being a saying that has parallels elsewhere, in fact, it seems to be a direct quote from other places, there's the issue of, so what does this mean? Does it mean that people are born Gnostics or born as part of a spiritual elite? Does this mean that that you don't have any choice in whether you progress spiritually or not? Does this mean that you're predestined? And that raises some interesting questions, particularly since there are still scholars who like to say that Gnostics, the early Gnostics, or early Gnostic schools were spiritual elitists that did not offer much hope or salvation or anything to the common man or the common woman.
Interesting, and it's interesting that you bring up the sort of Gnostic elitism, because it is something we've discussed several times, I think, on the show. It's one of those topics that seems to come up. I always find this kind of a very interesting passage in many ways. For me, I mean, there's lots of ways we can look at this. We can sort of look at the idea of the concept of God, the Almighty, being a singularity. Singularity from which everything animates, everything exists. That point within the circle and then ever expanding. So we've got kind of that concept and idea. We've got that idea. I've seen this pop up on Facebook, and I don't know where I can credit the source from. And I don't remember if it was like a little Gnostic story, if it's a little Facebook meme. So, excuse me if I get this wrong, but, I remember seeing this on several occasions. But it's this idea of, we die, and we meet God and kind of find out idea, okay, well, hey, cool, God looks like me. And then you find out, well, everybody I've experienced in my life is God. Everybody that I've ever thought about has been God. Adolf Hitler, was me. And that's how I experienced God, as Adolf Hitler. I was you. I was Father Tony. I was, everyone I've ever encountered in my life. So again, you've sort of got this idea of, I will choose you, one from 10,000, two, or one from 1,000, two from 10,000. I don't know if this necessarily points to elitism, or maybe is this just the point of those who become aware, those who become awakened, those who experience Gnosis. But I don't know if I would necessarily say that this is, kind of a Gnostic elitism. It's definitely one of those, I think, a very controversial verse. And like you said, it's not just here in the Gospel of Thomas. We have it in other sources, like in the Pistis Sophia.
Yes. Yeah, the one thing that I think is interesting, that if you look at Calvinism, what John Calvin was teaching when he was teaching predestination, the idea that God has God's elect, God elects some to salvation, others to damnation, that his position was that this ought to encourage humility. In Christians, because if you didn't have any say in it, well, you can't really boast about it. Now, anybody who's ever paid a whole lot of attention to certain Reformed communities can probably say that this didn't work very well. But people can be very puffed up with that within that community. But the reality is that the intention on Calvin's part was to say, look, if you are part of the elect, it's not by anything you did. It is purely through God. So if this idea that Jesus chose certain people for this level of ascent or holiness, that this may not be something that anybody can really feel elite about because they were chosen specifically by Christ. Now, a flip side to that, in my view, is we can say, well, we don't know why Christ chose these people. We don't have a real good understanding necessarily of why these people were selected, were there qualities that Christ is looking for. We don't know that. And when we talk about why some people become Gnostics or who are drawn to this path, why does that happen? Why do many of us have a story? And I was talking with Brother Jonathan about this recently. Many of us have this story that oftentimes goes way back. There were certain things, even from a very young age, that kind of put us on this path. Not true for everybody, of course. It's not true for everybody. But for many people, you can look back and see that. So, if Jesus does choose people for this level of spiritual development, is that just because he's playing eeny, meeny, miny, mo, catch a Gnostic by the toe? Or is there something that Jesus is looking for specifically? And so either way, if Jesus is doing the choosing, certainly that ought to put the kibosh on feeling all puffed up, because ultimately it is Jesus's choice. But we do have this question of how much of the preparation for being chosen or is something that we do for ourselves. And I think it's particularly important because for modern Gnostics, but as I believe what we know about the ancient Gnostics, this is not a path of resting on your laurels. It's not a passive path. It's a path of constant activity. There's constant efforts in self-knowledge, in prayer, and in working on oneself. So it certainly is not a passive thing, and it's not something that's just going to get dumped into your head. Even in modern times, we know that even with the rare case of someone like Philip K. Dick, who did have something dumped in his head, that usually didn't turn out very well for the person who has had that done to them without a whole lot of preparation. So I think that this passage may reflect an idea that there are relatively few people who are going to be on this path, but why they are chosen is not really defined.
No, it's not really defined. And, and I do say I find, kind of the wording chosen, because we talk so much on the show about those who kind of pursue the path of Gnosticism, of doing various spiritual exercises, of whether it's meditation, whether it's centering prayer, etc., etc., etc. Now, it could be argued that we're kind of preaching to those who are already chosen, this is a work that you must continue to do. But again, here we definitely have this idea of chosen. This isn't something that we kind of get drawn to because of our own ego. This isn't something that is not necessarily a path that we chose for ourselves, but something that in this path Jesus said, I shall choose you. Pretty clear. I shall choose you. But again, what does that mean? Is this, is this the way of the individual within? I mean, if we want to go into the idea of even multiple lives, of during this process of this incarnation, of finally getting awakened, is it a whole entire process? Again, I mean, there are so many Gnostic myths, Gnostic ideas of kind of like the pearl necklace, that the pearls get scattered all among the room, and you shall never know it's a pearl necklace again until every single pearl is gathered and put back upon its strand. So, what does it mean to be chosen? Is it something that, as Gnostics, like I said, do we have this awakening? For many of us, like I said, it is young. I think many of the guests we have in the show, I remember just recently when we had Bishop Stephan Huller on the show, I found it pretty interesting, even though I've known Stephan myself for over 20 years now, hearing kind of the experiences that he had as a very young person when he sort of had kind of this Gnostic awakening. So is this something that, all Gnostics have this chosen experience? Interesting.
Well, and the other thing is, when I'm looking here at the hymn, when I'm looking here at the Pistis Sophia, it's a very difficult passage. But when he discusses this is in 134. We have this dialogue. The Savior answered and said unto Mary, I say unto you, they will find 1 in 1,000 and 2 in 10,000 for the accomplishment of the mystery of the first mystery. This I will tell unto you when I have explained to you the expansion of the universe. For this cause, therefore, I have rent myself asunder and have brought the mysteries into the world, because all are under sin and all are in need of the gift of the mysteries. So there's a certain universalism in that passage. All are under sin and all are in need of the gift of the mysteries. When we find that Jesus has rent himself asunder and, to bring this into the world. There is also the possibility that there are going to be certain people who are going to be chosen for certain types of work to bring about Gnosis and the gospel to a world that is under sin. And that this may have to do more with a particular vocation. We don't actually know that. As we've discussed on this show, sometimes we have these isolated passages that could very well have been essentially notes to remind whoever was teaching that, okay, we're going to expound on this doctrine. We're going to have, this is the note to remind you of that particular doctrine. Now we're going to expound. So we may have a very partial teaching, but there's a possibility that there are some people who have, this may be referring to people who have specific missions, but doesn't necessarily mean that these are the only elect. That, there's going to be, we know this. We know that there are some people who are 1 in a million, as they say, who have very specific talents, very specific abilities that suit them for a vocation, and they can do a certain type of work. That's a possibility here as well.
I think that's I think that's beautiful the way that you put that there. And I think you've got something to say when we all do have certain talents. Not everyone possesses the skills of being a carpenter. Not everyone possesses the skill of being a bricklayer. We all have various talents. Now, do we all necessarily bring them to the table? Do we all necessarily do what we need to make those talents mature? I mean, let's take someone who's a musician. Someone may have been born with the gifts of being a great pianist or a guitar player, but unless they pursue that, they practice, they're dedicated. And again, I think this kind of then ties back into what we're always preaching about, spiritual practices. If this talent is there, whatever this is, you've got to bring it forth. And the only way to bring it forth is by actually doing the work and not actually just sitting around thinking about it,
Absolutely. I think I once heard somebody said, if you want to be chosen, choose yourself. Don't just stand back there. But all right, if you are yearning for something more, start on that path, and you're going to have a much better chance of being chosen. Because again, we don't know what the criteria is here. We don't know it at all.
Well, I think this is something we'll probably get into some pretty fun discussions with probably Father Tony and maybe even with Jonathan in our Talk Gnosis After Dark. I want to ask our audience a response question: is how did you come to Gnosticism? Did you feel chosen? Did you have an experience at a young age, like many of our listeners and even guests on the show have? Please leave your answer in our YouTube comments here and also on our Facebook page.
All right. We do have a little bit of news. Registration for the Apostolic Joanite Church's conclave is now open. For those of you who are unfamiliar, the Apostolic Joanite Church does sponsor Talk Gnosis and the Gnostic Wisdom Network, and they are a modern Gnostic church in the United States. Every year, actually in the United States and in Australia, and every year.
Canada.
And Canada, I'm sorry, North America, Australia, and Spain. I do apologize wholeheartedly here. They are an international modern Gnostic church, but every year they have their annual conclave. While this is a meeting for Joanite clergy and seminarians, it is open to the public, and it's an opportunity to get to meet some modern Gnostics, to hang out, have fun, but to also hear in some cases, some world-class scholars and speakers. So if you are interested in this, the conclave will take place May 21st through 26th, 2015, in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. The tickets are $950 for the week, everything included, room and board, $1,500 for couples. Weekend, single day, and commuter rates are also available. If this is of interest to you, you can go to joanite.org/conclave 2015, and you can ask your questions there or get registered. But we would encourage you, particularly if you don't have a local Gnostic community, to consider going to conclave. It can be a great way to get to meet some people, to attend some classes, and just have a good time.
And if I can give a little plug myself, I mean, these events are wonderful, and I mean, regardless whether you consider yourself a Joanite, whether you're just new to the Gnostic path, whether you're interested in other Gnostic organizations. Like I said, the things you can learn at these things is just phenomenal. I mean, some of their guests have been just great speakers, great subjects. You get to hang out with a bunch of cool brethren, and sisters, and I think that, everybody really will enjoy themselves. And for room and board and food and all the events, I actually think it's a pretty good deal. So I would encourage all of our listeners, sign up.
Absolutely.
Anything coming up at next week?
Yes, we're coming up on Talk Gnosis, Landro Rinsler and the power of meditation. So I know that a lot of our viewers and listeners practice meditation, so this should be a great show.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, everyone, and we will see you next week.
Take care, everybody.
Good night.
This has been a production of the Gnostic Wisdom Network. For more information about this and all of GWN's programming, please visit gnosticwisdom.net. The opinions expressed in this show do not necessarily reflect the opinions of GWN, the Apostolic Johannite Church, or any other organization. This has been released under a Creative Commons Attribution Share Alike 4.0 International License and is brought to you by the generous support of our patrons. To support our programs and become a patron, please visit patreon.com/Gnostic. That's patreon.com/GNOSTIC.